Thanks for joining us for this episode of Coffee with Closers, where business leaders share insights on how to build businesses from the ground up and best practices for innovating in their industry.
Hey, John, I'm super excited to have you join me for this episode of Coffee with Closers.
Hey, Sam. Thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, most certainly. Well, every entrepreneur has an interesting story of how they overcame obstacles to become an entrepreneur. Can you share with our audience a little bit about your journey?
Yeah, obstacles to say the least. It's probably a familiar story, but a little bit unique, obviously. I'm an evolutionist in the sense that I don't really set hard goals and go for them. I'm more of an opportunist, and so that's how it's kind of rolled for me. My first, in college, I was a marketing background, didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. And so I got into sales, but not because I knew what it was about. It was just more, I didn't want the jobs in marketing that were available at the time. And DeWalt Power Tools came by and said, hey, you want to be on our event marketing / sales team? Sounded cool. Did it for DeWalt for about a while, driving around, giving away, tools to construction workers, which was fun, but it was more event marketing. Then I kind of graduated into selling to Home Depot. So I would take a $10,000 order and turn it into a $50,000 order, right? So that was kind of more like sales. And then I stopped that and then I went and sold for Xerox. And that's where I got my real sales education. They had a great sales training program. And, if you ever want to learn how to take rejection, try to sell copiers. And then after that, there was something itching in me that I didn't know. I just didn't like the corporate structure, even though I was doing what I thought I was supposed to do. Being from the East Coast, we're a little bit more traditionalist, especially back then, about startups. And that was for all the weirdos on the West Coast. But East Coast, it was more get a job, do your thing, get promoted. But it never sat right with me. And I didn't know this at the time, but my mom and dad were both entrepreneurs, even though they never called it that back then. My mom worked out of the house. My dad was a consultant. And so I had that entrepreneurial itch. I just didn't know it. And so a buddy of mine started a company called Thrive Networks that it was self-funded, did outsourced IT services, and they needed somebody to help run in sales. So I jumped on board. I was the fourth person on board with them. Loved it. It wasn't like he's a risk taker in the sense of like sleep on mom's couch, eat ramen noodles type of kid. I'm more the calculated risk taker where there has to be a couple of pieces in place for me to take that jump, but I don't overthink it. Like I think probably the skill that I have been given is I'm an opportunist, and I can kind of usually take a look at a scenario and put, 2 or 3 data points together and say, yep, that makes sense, and go for it. And I don't overanalyze it. And so I jumped on board with them, ran sales about 7 years. We were the fastest growing company in Massachusetts for a few years in a row. Got us to about 85 employees, about 12 million in revenues, and then we sold off to Staples. Staples bought us. Spent about a year going through that integration, and again was reminded I'm not a corporate guy. Don't have much of a filter, and I really don't like playing politics. So after a little while, Staples offered me another position. They fired me, and I was looking for a job. And Basho, this training company that I had taken, said, "Hey, you want to be a trainer?" I was like, no, I don't like trainers. Most trainers either failed sales professionals or professional presenters. And they said, don't worry, you have to use these techniques to sell so you can train so you can get paid. I was like, okay, practice what you preach. Joined them. About a year and a half into that, new CEO came in, 2007 hit, fired everybody on the spot one day. Everybody else was freaked out looking for a job. I saw opportunity and said, this guy just walked away from what used to be a $3 million business with an insane client list. Had another one of the trainers come with me. So we started a separate company and basically resold. And it was, again, because I didn't want to go off. I still didn't want to go off on my own because I still felt like, I don't know, like if I can do this myself, I should have, but I didn't. And then about 3 years into that relationship wasn't working out too well. So I ended up splitting off and giving him the company and going off on my own. And 10 years later, I got my own little company now. I got 10 people, 12 people now, doing some cool stuff, working with some cool companies and trying to kind of innovate and drive along the way.
Yeah, and that's an interesting story. So what are some lessons you learned in the process of building your business and growing it?
Let me count the ways. I think I think adaptability and agility are probably the things that you have to be really, really good at when it comes to being an entrepreneur. Like if you set your stone, that's why I don't like hardcore goal setting, because if you're hardcore goal setting and you're singular focus, sometimes that's a great thing because it, everything else aside. but it also, I think, prevents you from looking at other opportunities. So I think an opportunistic lens is and constantly experimenting. You know what I mean? Like, you know, the lean startups, you know, MVPs type of stuff. The other one I think is really important, and I posted this on LinkedIn the other day, which is when you're starting a business, I think it's extremely important as a founder to start a business with other founders who are who have different skill sets. So one of the reasons that when I split from Basho and started this other company, Kensei Partners, right? It was with one of the other senior trainers, and we were just the two last men standing. It wasn't like we decided to go into business together. It was like, there's a bunch of money to make. Let's go make it, right? And the problem with it was, he's a good guy, but when you have the exact same skill set, you're constantly in competition with each other. Because I'm looking at him like, I can do your job better than you. He's looking at me like he can do his job better than me, my job better than me. And it's not, you think it's great because you share a similar mentality of what you do. And so you have a familiarity, but you have to separate church and state and all that other stuff and have other people do things. So for instance, when I went off on my own, my first hire by far, and I recommend this to any sales-oriented leader, is you got to get operations and finance. You have to have somebody up front. Like, my first person that I brought on board was my COO, CFO. As soon as I could afford her. And it's not like I went cheap here. I went, like I told her, I go, do my books on the side, but until, once I can afford you, I want you to come on board, and I'm going to pay you. And she was like, okay. And that has been a godsend, because it has allowed me to go sell and go and not have to worry about the details, because she takes care of all that. And I look at the other side, my wife, she's a similar situation. She has got her own startup, 10 people, environmental science, and works with, local cities and governments, but she doesn't have an operations person. And I see her staying up until 3:00 in the morning, sending invoices out, like chasing customers for payment and all that other stuff. And she is sales through and through. I mean, well, she's actually an engineer, but her passion and the way that so if she didn't have to deal with that stuff, she could sell like 10 times better than I ever could. But she is dragged down by the operation stuff. And so my big recommendation for founders is find complementary skill sets that are different than yours, and then challenge each other, but trust each other to do your jobs and get out of the way.
Yeah, that is a great lesson. And I don't know how many entrepreneurs really understand that big principle that you just shared, because I don't know if you've read the book Traction. One of the things that in that book that they talk about is the visionary leader versus the integrator role. What you're describing is that integrator role, because the visionary leader could be that sales function that you fill in as a visionary leader. But if you drain your time, right, the revenue producing activity time with operational functions, you're taking away from things that actually add value to the company, as opposed to wasting time on things that drains your energy.
And I'll give you one more too, which is engineer. This is for the engineering founders out there. Sorry, whatever you're building isn't cool enough to sustain without sales. If you don't build your entire organization around sales, you'll fail eventually. Don't look at sales. Engineers, and I worked a large portion of my career with engineers. I love engineers. I was one sales guy within 50 engineers, and still some of them are my best friends. But it has nothing to do with what you sell. It has everything to do with how you sell it. If you think your product, service, solution, technology is the best, then you're going to get into a feature function dump, and you're going to lose, because eventually somebody else is come up with, and unfortunately I see engineers, I call it the founder's dilemma. What happens is an engineer comes up with a solution, right? Whatever it is. And I've always said, somebody said this early in my career, that sales is the transfer of enthusiasm. Okay. That when you believe in something, right, and you just transfer that enthusiasm over to somebody else. So what happens with an engineer, you'll take the most introverted engineer on the planet, and they'll tell you up and down sideways that they are not in sales. Sales, gross. But then you ask them, hey, talk to me about the last time you solved a problem. Talk to me about the last thing you created, and you watch them light up like a Christmas tree, right? So what happens is they create this solution. They then create a company around that. And then they go talk to friends, families, and fools, right? And because they're talking to an audience that is usually familiar, and they're going to get good feedback on their solution. Then they get a couple of customers, right? Because people say, oh yeah, that's a great idea. You know what? I'll try that out. And so they're getting this feedback that's all positive. Because you know why? Because they're the founder, and they're presenting that with so much passion to the people that they're talking to, and they're transferring that enthusiasm over to them. And then what happens is the engineer, and by the way, this happened to me, my good friend who now works for me as my chief growth officer, he used to be our CTO at my previous company. He literally said to me one day, I don't know why this is so hard. Everybody needs what we sell, what we do. And I was just like, Jesus, dude, thanks for shitting all over my career. But let's play that out. And eventually what happens is they grow through marketing or whatever it is, or inbound, because there is some good stuff there. And then but then they'll hire like VP of sales. Let's bring a VP of sales and go, because this is easy to sell. And then the VP of sales, because they don't have the passion, they don't have the background, they don't have the insights, they end up failing. And then the engineer's like, oh, sales, I knew it. It was a waste of time. So let's go all into marketing. And marketing will get you pretty far, but then you hit the ceiling and you have to do. So if you look at sales as a necessary evil, you're going to fail. I've worked with Slack, Tableau, DropBox, Box. Every one of their CEOs, when they came out and were super hot right out of the gate, were like, oh, we don't need sales reps. And they wrote articles on how proud they were that they didn't have sales reps. Mm-hmm. Guess what? I've trained every single one of those companies' sales teams, because they eventually have to figure out how to sell it. So that would be my suggestion for engineers, but for engineering founder, but the sales founder, go find a partner that is not sales so they can do something else. But an engineer, respect sales, or else you're going to fail.
Yeah, or they will say, "Oh, we have a product-led growth model. We're going to use our product to acquire customers, and we have a freemium model, and they just auto upgrade and do all those things." But at the end of the day, there's definitely a human intervention needed to make someone understand why you need that solution.
Think about Slack. Slack is the most viral solution on the planet. Once it gets into a company, and you try to rip it out, right? They have a 1,000-person sales team. You know what I mean? Like you'd think, oh, product-led growth. Yeah, that's the direction. Well, then why does Slack have 1,000 sales reps? Because your product is not more viral than Slack. I'll promise you that.
That's true.
It's not going to be more sticky for people just to download it and start using it than Slack is. It's the number one thing I've ever seen. I've never seen something like Slack in an organization, but yet they still have to sell it.
I know. And that's why it was sold for $17 billion, right? Some massive numbers. Crazy. Yeah, exactly. So obviously, John, you're an author, entrepreneur, keynote speaker. You're a father. You've accomplished a lot in your career. What's the one thing that you're super proud of?
A lot. I think the things that I'm most proud of are the people that I've been able to give the opportunity along the way and seeing them succeed. Probably one of my favorite things was when I was at Thrive. We were the fastest growing company. Great. But there was this one kid who came into my office in an interview, and my CEO didn't want him, right? He was a kind of a, we were looking to hire one sales rep to back me up, right? And it was an inside sales role. And one of them was this polished kid, top of his class, MBA, all that stuff. And then this other kid, Kevin, who was a grinder, right? State school kid, worked at Home Depot, but I liked him. And my CEO and my CRO, they were like, nope, absolutely, we want this kid. And I was like, I want this kid. And I made a deal with him. I go, let me hire both of them. And I promise you, I'll fire one of them in 30 days. Okay. But let's just see who wins. And this kid head down, grinded, did everything I asked of him. This kid would, do half of what I was asking, come up with like charts and graphs about why his stuff was better than the other kids. I fired that kid in, 20 days and worked with this kid. Fast forward, I get fired from Staples. He stays on, he takes over as VP of sales. And last year when I was in Aruba and my dad had just passed away and I was not in a really good spot, and I get this phone call out of nowhere, and I hadn't talked to this kid in probably 2 or 3 years. And he goes, hey, I just want to thank you. And I was like, for what? And he goes, Thrive just recapped, like we, got bought by private equity and rolled over a couple of times. And he's like, I'm now a multimillionaire, and my family is set for the rest of their lives. And I just want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity. That is the type of stuff I'm most proud of. Recently, one of my employees, she had working in a very patriarchal organization, and she was a manager, but she was still being treated like the woman. She was, taking notes and had to go get the coffee for everybody. And she was just in that environment, and she felt like that was the thing. That was it. You know what I mean? Because that was what she was used to. brought her on board here. You know, a year later, she calls me up and she's like, I just want to let you know, it's taken me about a year to unwind from what I thought was just normal life. And your environment here, your structure has allowed me to realize that, you know, like I can do whatever I want to do and I can be who I want to be. And I don't have to be the note taker. I don't have to be this. Oh, by the way, I'm happier than I've ever been. I just paid off all my bills. I was able to buy a car that I've never bought before. My husband and I are doing great. Like those are the type of things that get me out of bed every morning. And then the biggest one is, you know, well, not the biggest one, but one of the other ones is writing the book with my daughter. You know, I was trying to get my daughter, to understand a little bit what I did, you know, because when you tell your kid if you're a doctor or a lawyer or any of that stuff, and you tell your kid, and kids understand that, they see that on TV, but when you tell your kid you're in sales, they're kind of like, what's that? Like, so what do you talk to people all day long? So, and I used to travel quite a bit before the pandemic hit. I mean, I'm 2 million miles in less than 10 years here. And so I was missing a lot, and I wanted to figure out a way to get her a little bit more engaged and involved with what I did. And so we ended up writing a book together. It was her journey on selling Girl Scout cookies. And so we used that and we wrote a book called I Want to Be in Sales When I Grow Up. And it was a great way to bond with her, but also, you know, leaned into kind of the vision of elevating the profession. Because, and that's what my why is try to help elevate the profession of sales the right way, in my opinion. Because no kid ever says that. No kid ever says I want to be in sales when I grow up. And I think that's a shame, because I think when sales is done right, it's the greatest profession in the world. When done wrong, it's one of the worst. And so it introduces kids to sales as a potential career instead of a default career. And the goal is to also try to get more women into sales, because it's based on my daughter, and I think women are some of the best sales professionals I've ever met in my life. And third, you know, it all goes to charity, so I don't make any money on it. My daughter actually does not want to be in sales when she grows up. She wants to be a veterinarian. So 100% of the profits go to the World Wildlife Fund, which is pretty cool. We were able to write a check last year for $25,000 to the World Wildlife Fund, which felt really good.
That's incredible. That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, I think the whole fact that you just mentioned, like elevating the whole, you know, the whole industry as a whole, right? Because I think we all think sales is like, oh, these, you know, sneezy sales guys are trying to sell me something. But at the end of the day, I think HubSpot kind of talks about this, right? It's not, sales is not selling, it's helping, right? So if you have that perspective of I'm here to help the person, that really changes the game in terms of how you approach the entire sales process.
I tell people all the time, I don't sell you anything. I literally do not sell you anything. I help you achieve your goals or solve your problems. That's it. And if your problems aren't big enough and your goals aren't big enough, why are we having this conversation? Right? If I have to convince you of something, something's wrong. Something's wrong. That's why people say, oh, what's your favorite sales movies, right? Glengarry Glen Ross, Wolf of Wall Street, Boiler Room. Wrong. Those are the worst sales movies I've ever seen in my life. They're great movies. They're entertaining movies, but they're the worst sales movies I've ever seen in my life. It's everything that's wrong about selling, right? They're trying to trick people. It's just about their commission check. And you know what I mean? Like, ugh. Now, you want to watch some great movies, sales movies? Pursuit of Happiness. That's a great sales movie. Talk about hard work and believing in what you do and grinding. Love that. And then my favorite of all time, which is Tommy Boy. That's the best sales movie of all time. So if anybody's looking for it, go watch it again. If you haven't seen Tommy Boy and put a sales lens on, go watch it with a sales lens. It's the greatest sales movie you'll ever see.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, the way that I approach it is too, is like, hey, you have to believe in the product that you sell, that it is going to solve a problem, because you don't want to sell something that you don't believe in. But if you do believe that it actually, save the money or make the money or eliminate some sort of a risk in their organization, then you trust that. And then you go and tell them like, hey, do you have this issue? And then if my solution can meet it, but if you don't want it, no hard feelings. I'll just go to someone else who actually value what I have to offer.
And that's what you said something really important, which is, and if for everybody out there listening to this, if you don't believe in what you're selling, if you don't believe that what you're selling makes a real difference for the right client, not for everybody, but for the right client, if you don't believe that, please, I beg you, go find something else to do. Go find another company to sell for. Go get a different job. Because if you're just out there selling shit you don't believe in, you're the problem. You're the one giving the rest of us a bad name. Right? If you're just in it for a commission check, then you're my least favorite type of sales rep on the planet are those type of people. It's just, it makes my skin crawl when I hear people, I don't give a shit what I sell. I can sell ice to Eskimos. That's the worst type of salesperson I've ever heard of in my life.
That's true. That's true. I know you and I both are passionate about the topic.
Mhm.
So what advice would you give a first-time sales leader? What kind of things do they need to invest into grow their sales skill? Leadership skills to be able to build and manage a team.
You got to break down leadership, coaching, managing, and forecast, for instance, right? I think those are four different categories. Leadership is getting people to believe in what they sell. Leadership is leading by example. You know what I mean? Like sitting on not just listening in on a cold call blitz, but sitting in on the cold call blitz and making cold calls with your reps, or, managing a couple of deals just to make sure that you're staying on top of what the objections are and stuff like that. Right. And not just sitting in your office and barking orders at people, telling them to, right. So I think that's a critical factor, is that if you can't paint a vision for somebody, I always say this to leaders. If you can't paint a vision for me, you'll never get me to do more than my job, right? Like if I don't believe in something bigger than myself, that we're all here to achieve a bigger goal here, then I'm just going to do my job. But if you paint this vision of where we're going, what our values are, and all that other stuff, now I'm gonna go for it with you, right? So A is, just be transparent with what you're doing. Don't try to hide stuff. If you're trying to sell your company in the next 3 years, tell your team you're trying to sell them in the next 3 years, and give them all a little bit of a piece of it. So when you do, everybody wins. Don't pretend like you're not. Teams aren't stupid. They know what's going on, right? The other one is, just again, lead by example. Learn about your reps' individual coaching needs. Don't be blanket across the board. Don't just say, everybody, because everybody's not motivated by money, So, if you put spiffs in place, you'll motivate certain people, but other people will actually be demotivated. Measure on different things other than percentage to target. Look for all the small nuanced things, right? So like cold call blitzes, don't just measure who gets the most meetings, right? Because there's usually somebody on your team who's better than everybody else, and they're always going to be on the top of the leaderboard. And for that person who's not, it's almost demoralizing every time you go into a call blitz or something like that. So look for other wins, like small things. And then the last piece I'd say is really just, crowdsource and work with your team and create a culture of continuous improvement. So one of the things I used to do is once a week, when we would go over our team goals and all that other stuff, I would then say, okay, everybody, this week, what do we want to try to work on this week as a group, right? And is it a certain objection? Is it getting through gatekeepers? Is it, asking a certain type of question, whatever it is, right? And then we would all right, well, this is the challenge. Okay, cool. Now who wants to own it? Right. And when I say own it, I don't mean like do a book report on this. I mean, literally Google like best way of handling objections, something like that. Right. And what they would do is they would find a technique or an approach to address that challenge, whatever it was. And then they would kind of present it to us and say, okay, cool. We'd practice it. And then that week I would have a notepad, and everybody would have the notepad, and they would write down at the top, challenge equals whatever it is, approach equals, and then write down the approach, and then a T-bar plus minus. And what I said to them is, no matter what happens this week, do whatever you want to do for everything else. But when that thing happens, okay, you have to use that approach. I don't care if you don't like it or not. You have to use it. And then you have to write, did it work? Did it not work? Plus, minus, plus, minus, plus, minus. And then what I would do is at the end of the week, I would collect all those pieces of paper. And I would say, all right, everybody, we hit that objection, whatever, 50 times. We use that technique 50 times. We got 20 positives and 30 negatives. That's actually pretty good. But let's keep that one. Next week, what do we want? So if you work on continuous improvement and a coaching and culture of that, but you're not constantly just stuffing up, you're asking them, you're getting them involved, they own stuff, you're going to see results. You're going to get people's buy-in, as opposed to just, giving them cadences, giving them the script, giving them the email templates, telling them the presentation and how they do it. That's just turning them into robots.
Mm-hmm. So obviously big organization. You talked about, organizations that you've trained, those are mega SaaS companies, right? And you even talked about how you grew a company, fourth man, to join the company to 85 employees. So all those organizations, you had, much larger team members. So a smaller organization trying to build a sales department, like what is the minimum viable team structure that you need to have to build that sales team?
Well, first of all, I think your CEO has to be your first sales rep. I don't care if they're an engineer or not. And what I would do is your engineer, your CEO is going to be your best sales rep. So what I would do is if I had to start from scratch, okay, I would hire kind of and this is probably not the best HR answer out there, but I would hire probably a 25 plus year old kid who had already been trained by one of the big companies like the Salesforces, right? So, because I don't want to be your training ground. I don't have the energy to do that. I don't have the resources to do that. So I'm going to go poach from a Salesforce, an ADP, something like that, right? And I'm going to get a young, hungry, and what I'm going to look for is drive and passion and grit. I don't care about skill. I don't care about, experience. I can train all of that stuff, or I can get resources, but I can't train drive. I can't train passion. I can't train those things. And so if I can find somebody who's young and hungry and wants to learn, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring them on I'm going to have them hit the phones, right? And try to set me up on meetings. But every meeting I go on, or every meeting they get, and this is a nice little incentive, every meeting they get from me, they get to come along. They get to sit on the Zoom call. They get to hear. And what they'll be doing is documenting what's the flow, what's the process, what kind of questions, what objections do we hit, that type of stuff, right? And then we're going to start to look at the metrics, like what KPIs really matter to us. Like, is it the cold call to, let's map out the whole sales process, right? Like the initial call prospecting activity to the demo, to the qualification call, and then the qualification call to the demo, and then the demo to the negotiations, then negotiations to close, right? Or proposal to close. Going to have that out, and then we're going to look at each one of those sections and look at the conversion ratios of each one of those sections, so we can have at least a baseline to compare against when I start hiring more people for this. I personally think that we need to go back to full cycle sales in a lot of ways. I think the predictable revenue model is a joke, even though I train it for the most part. It's not customer centric in any way, shape, or form. And I think it's a challenge in a lot of different ways. So I think that model right there helps. But obviously the answer is it depends on what you're selling, right? I mean, if you're selling professional services versus a software versus something with a PLG versus, you know what I mean? Like, it really depends on what that motion is. But as a CEO, you have to at least map out the structure of what a good call looks like and document the hell out of it, so that when you walk out of meetings and you lose that deal or you win that deal, you can kind of look back at them and say, okay, this is what a good deal win looks like. This is what a loss looks like. Let's start to mirror that, right?
Yeah. So if you talk about the full cycle sales model, I mean, the biggest problem that we have today is most of the AEs don't want to be the hunter.
Yeah.
They don't like prospecting. They don't like outbound. So what advice would you give in terms of how they should, maximize their time in terms of being in front of prospects that are ready to have sales conversation versus finding opportunities to even open up the door?
I never understood the mentality of an AE who didn't want to prospect. I will tell you right now, if I was a VP of sales and I was going through a forecast review with an AE, and if they didn't hit their quota or their target or something like that, and their excuse to me was that they didn't get enough leads from marketing or they didn't get enough leads from their SDR, before that phrase came out of their mouth, I'd fire them. I'm not even kidding. Because what kind of person are you? Like, I don't know about you, Sam, but do you ever want your success to be determined by somebody else? Right?
Because you're basically blaming somebody else's for your inability to achieve your goals.
It's not that hard. I'm not talking about AEs sitting there doing 50 dials a day and sending out 1 million cadences. Like, you're an AE. Take all the research and prep you do for a meeting, scrunch that down a little bit and do it on a prospect, and be interested in that prospect and be authentic with why you want to reach out to them and have a real conversation with a client that actually looks like they could use your services. It's not that hard. I still prospect every day, and I'm a CEO of my own little company here, 10, 12 people. 30 minutes a day. I pick one account. I go do all my research. I try to figure out who I want to talk to. And then I map out a 6 to 7 touch campaign, and I send out my first email, and then I schedule 3, 4, 5 touches. And then it's just half hour every day. That's it. And think about that. My ACV is $50,000. My quota personally is $1 million, right? So if I do one account a day, and by the way, I've mapped out my sales stages, so I'll tell you my conversion ratios. I usually get about a 20% response rate. If I do it right, like a really thoughtful, tailored campaign, I get about a 20% response rate, right? So one account a day, that's 5 accounts a week. That's 20 accounts a month times 20%, right? So there's 4 net new meetings every single month. And if I go through the conversion ratios there, we have a 42% proposal to close, but an on average across 25% overall close. So that means 4 net new meetings. I'm going to close one of them at an average contract value of $50,000. Once a month times 12, that's $600,000. I'm 60% of the way to my quota by doing a half an hour work. And if any AE tells me I don't have time to prospect, shut up. Shut up. You're wrong. You're just not efficient and you just don't want to do it. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I tell the AEs, get your head out of your ass and do some prospecting, because then you'll learn. You'll think about the interest level of you actually being interested, creating that opportunity, working through it and closing it. It's such a more satisfying thing than getting a lead that was pretty much a layup and then going and closing and getting your commission check. Again, those are the ones I don't want in this industry. If you're just looking for that easy road for your SDR to qualify all the BANT stuff, oh, there's definitely a need, there's definitely a timeline, there's definitely power here. I mean, what kind of sales skills does that take? You're an order taker.
Yeah, most certainly. And I think, also if you're using SDRs who don't have a lot of training or experience before, they're probably not going to do a great job in those early conversations because they're not trained enough to even have such conversation, those business discussions.
And if I had an SDR, I'd treat them like gold. I would train them. I would coach them. I would, because they're doing the stuff I don't want to do. You know what I mean? Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying like prospecting is awesome by any stretch of the imagination. It's horrendous. You know what I mean? It's the lowest conversion ratio of any part of the sales process. So no, that's why nobody wants to do it. But if you put some thought into it, it's actually not that bad. You can make it somewhat interesting.
Something that I need to start practicing what you're teaching. So I have a question about the cadence that you described. So do you have a call step in your sequence, or is it strictly just email?
No, you got to do calls. Well, I'll take that back. I think a lot of this, how many touches and what mediums and all that other stuff, the answer is it all depends on who your target or your ICP and your personas are, right? I mean, I still do think phone is viable right now. I think it will be for the next 5 or 6 years. Look, Gen Xers, I'm a Gen Xer. We grew up with the phone like this, right? So I actually don't mind talking on the phone. I'll pick up my call. You call my cell phone, I'll pick it up. I'll have a conversation with you. Now, when millennials and Gen Zs take over the full decision, and we're the kind of decision makers right now, right? We're the 40 somethings plus. So once millennials and Gen Z take over the real decision makers, once they hit their 40s and 50s, maybe phone's going to die. But until then, it's still a viable thing. And by the way, because it's not about one or the other anymore. It's not about one email. It's not about one voicemail. It's about the contact strategy. It's about the story that we tell these people. And I'm a big believer that sales reps need to become much more like mini marketers these days. And it's all about positive impressions. Right? So I call, I leave a voicemail, I retweet you, I share a piece of content, I send you an email, I hit you up on LinkedIn. So if all those are orchestrated the right way and they're all positive impressions, then eventually there's going to be this familiarity with you. So when there is a need there, you might not get that, when you do call, they might say, okay, yeah. Or there might be that inbound that says, you know what, now we're ready. And so I think that's where you have to, it's not about one or the other. And I think in industries and personas, it kind of ebbs and flows. Certain industries are more phone focused. Certain industries are more email. Certain industries are on LinkedIn, certain industries are not. So I think it's just knowing your ICP and your personas and then figuring out the best way that they like to be communicated with.
Most certainly. This is a good segue to my next question, which basically I see you're a sales training organization, but you guys are a content producing machine. You've got webinars and podcasts and blogs and emails. So, there's a lot that you're doing from a content production standpoint. So what advice would you give a CEO or a senior leadership about the importance of leveraging content as a means to drive pipeline growth and also creating, sales opportunities?
Yeah, no, I think it's massive. I think it's the world we live in right now. And I don't mean like all your marketing content, by the way. I just mean thought leadership content. And so I'll give you a hack it's not a hack, it's a real thing. It's how I made sense of social selling and made it work for me. And this is any CEO can do this. I think every CEO should do this, and every rep should do this. Because when social selling first came out, again, as a Gen Xer, I'm like, geez, great. Yet another thing I got to do to be successful in sales. Fantastic. Add it to the list, right? And the whole idea of tweeting and posting and sharing, just it quite honestly, it bothered me. I'm like, this is stupid, right? But where it flipped for me was when I started thinking of it and looking at it as educating myself first. I should be educating myself on my industry, on the trends, on the personas that I go after, right? So what I started doing was following the thought leaders in my space, right? So I sell to SaaS, mostly VPs and CROs and VPs of enablement. So guess what? I started following VPs of sales, VPs of enablement, and the ones who were putting out content, right? And what I would do is I would consume their content to learn with the primary goal of learning. And then, and only when I learned something is when I would share it with my context. So, hey, really interesting article here by Sam who put this out. My key takeaways were X, Y, Z. What do you think, right? Because what happens there is you start to associate with other thought leaders, and you're using their content to add some color to it, because you don't have to be the content creator. You have to be the content curator. Think about it. If I write a blog, right? It takes I've been writing one for, 10 years now. I'm running out of things to say, but it usually takes me about an hour to sit down and think about something to write that's, I think, is meaningful enough, whatever. I send it to my team. They HubSpot it, they SEO it, they do all that stuff. And so we're like 2 to 3 hours into one blog post every single week, right? Now say I share that out there and you and I are connected, right? And you read my article. And then all of a sudden you share it out there and somebody you're connected to reads my article because you shared it. They're not connected to me, right? And they get value out of it. Who do they thank?
They thank me for sharing.
They thank you.
Correct.
They don't say thank. I might get another follower like, oh, cool, I like John's vibe. But they don't say thanks, John, for writing that article. They say thanks, Sam, for sharing that article. You get all the credit. I did all the work. So if you look at it as education first and then share, you start to put yourself in an authentic brand builder. Now, another small tip here for any thought leader, that if I could go back and do it all over again for CEOs, the first thing I would do is I would do exactly what you're doing here. I would do a podcast. What I would do is I would interview my key audience, see it, like whoever my target audience was. I would bring them on a podcast like this not to sell them anything, but to talk about the problems, the challenges. Because what happens there is you can take this video, you can cut it up 75 different ways. You can throw it on YouTube. You can put it on social. You can rip the audio, create a podcast, and then you can have it transcribed and you have your blog. So for a grand total of about $200 a month, you have content for days. And usually the people that come on your podcast will probably end up saying, hey, by the way, what do you do? If you're cool, you know what I mean? So that's the first thing that I would do if I was of a business, starting a business. I would start a podcast just like this, and I would record it on Zoom or whatever, Riverside here, and I would then cut up that stuff 7,000 times, throw it all over social, and and put it on a YouTube channel, and then put a podcast around it.
Most certainly, and I think it's the approach that you have as well, right? You're not trying to sell anything. You're trying to create value for your audience and give a platform for your prospective customer to share their knowledge. And if you do it with that intention, everybody will be willing to be on your show, and then ultimately it benefits you in the process.
I'm a big Gary Vee fan, right?
Yeah.
It's all about sharing content. Now, I differ a little bit with Gary. He's like, I give all my stuff away for free. And it's like, yeah, Gary, we're not all multimillionaires right now. And we don't all have a team. And I get it. You were doing this before everybody else with your wine library and all that shit, but you were making money along the way. Most founders and startups, when they have a service or a solution, they just can't give it away for free and hope that people will eventually pay money for that. So I differ with him a little bit on that. But in general, the more you can give away, the better. But what you can do, by the way, is like I have full training programs, right? I cut them up into little pieces. And honest, Sam, if you went to my website, if you went to my YouTube page, if you went to my blog and you spent enough time, you could get 95% of what I put together for free.
But the thing is, people want that concised and given to them in a structured format, so they're willing to pay you for it because that's what at the end of the day is. Exactly.
It's like you could get a Harvard education for free right now. You could literally go to Harvard right now. You go online. Every one of their courses is free. You can take it. Why do people spend $70,000 still to go to Harvard?
So obviously, working in the business versus working on the business, we all know the importance of it. And you are a sales trainer. You're building a company. You're also out in the field doing training. You're doing speaking engagements. How do you balance the strategic growth initiative versus the tactical implementation and execution of things that has to do with running a company?
Yeah, I'm not a good model for this one. I've been much more, and this is actually a transition I'm going through right now, as a matter of fact, like literally as we speak. I've been much more in the business than on the business. I've been grinding for 10 years, 12 years. Like I told you, 2 million miles in less than 10 years, traveling all over this world. COVID was probably the best thing that could ever happen to me. Got me grounded. Now I'm never getting back on an airplane. I think the answer is hire really good people. Hire really good people that can operationalize. And while you're out there grinding, doing your thing, they're making sure operationally the business is sound and the customers are happy. And you know what I mean? So I think my answer to that question is you got to hire slow, fire fast type of thing. You know what I mean? Be very, very, very thoughtful. I have two I have my CFO / COO and my chief growth officer. And there's no way I could be in a position where I am right now without those two. I'm now finally at a point, last year, I was saying my dad passed, and it was the first time that I was ripped out of the business. We had just signed Amazon. I was training all of their reps for 8 weeks straight, and, biggest customer we've ever brought in. My mom calls me, my dad wasn't doing well. So I hung up the phone. I called up my team. I said, cancel everything. If clients are pissed, give them their money back, whatever, I'm out. And I didn't, and that's all I said. And I went away, and I came back 4 weeks later, and the company was running like a drum. Clients were happy, revenue was there, and it was legit the first time in my life that I've been able to take a breath basically and say, wow, this company, I don't need to be the number one revenue generator for this thing to run, which is would quite honestly put me in a really weird spot, right? Because I've always made most of my self-worth has been in the driving the revenue for the business and all that other stuff. And now I have to learn how to be a different leader, more thoughtful, visionary, that type of thing on the business instead of in the business. And it's a journey I'm trying to figure out right now.
So knowing what you know today, what advice would you give your younger self?
Stay positive, surround yourself with good people, try to avoid the drama as much as you can, learn from everything you do. A very tactical thing would be, I'm a big fan of A/B split testing everything, and I relate this to sales, but you can relate it to anything else. You're going to do the activities, learn from them, right? Be focused, pick something, come up with a couple of different options of how to address that thing, do it, 50 times this way, 50 times that way, see which one yields up, and then keep testing and adjusting and being adaptive, and right. But yeah, hire slow, fire fast, just believe in what you do. Something that came to me recently, which was a really good thing to think about, was when you're a founder, a lot of times you feel like you work for your business, right? So you have a boss. It's your business. That's not the way it should be as a founder. Your business is an asset. Yeah, you shouldn't be a slave to your business. You started a business for a reason, right? To have autonomy, to have freedom, to do, that type of stuff. But yet most of us are working 17, 18 hours a day to feed the business. No. You got to switch it around. You got to think of your business as an asset. And what do I need to do to make my asset grow? And where can I help it? Right. So I think that shift in mentality was an important one for me.
Well, John, I certainly appreciate your time, and I really enjoyed our conversation, and I really hope our audience will find a lot of value in our discussion. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode.
Thanks for having me on, Sam. I appreciate it.
This episode of Coffee with Closers is brought to you by OneIMS, a leading digital marketing agency helping businesses win new customers. To request a free marketing ROI audit, please visit oneims.com. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. To make sure you never miss an episode, please subscribe.